Okay, so in one of our next chapters, on Chapter 7, when we look at workplace stress and issues in management, we're going to, we have several learning objectives. We want to look at what happened. We have an organizational stress model. We're going to look at categories of stressors in organization. We're going to talk about the effects of stress on health and well-being. We're going to talk about the relationship between stress and social support. We're going to explain the difference between stress and social support. We're going to describe the objectives of individual and organizational wellness approaches that are going on. When we look at work-life balance, as in our last chapter we actually talked about the current workforce being, when we look at the baby boomers and the Generation Xers and Yers, that they're actually more focused on that work-life balance. And it used to be really only the top executives that enjoyed more of a work-family balance program. And we see that demographics are indicating a big need for demand for child and elder care programs. The work and personal lives of employees are increasingly interconnected. People compensate for low work or personal life satisfaction by looking for activities in other domains. What is stress anyway? Stress is when we're feeling tense, anxious, worried. For an action, situation, or an event to be stressful, it must be perceived as a threat, challenge, or harm. And a stressor can be any potential harmful or situation that someone perceives as being threatening. And that's where that's why we're still in individual differences here, because people perceive stress. Some people, certain things don't bother them, and some things do. We have different factors outlined in this slide of sources where people might feel overloaded at work. They might have a boss that they don't get along with. They might have consistent computer problems. They might be plagued with time deadlines. Their job might be designed so poorly that they might be consistently under stressful conditions. There might be some other factors that are behind the scenes, such as marriage problems or financial problems. There might be a merger going on in the organization that some people are afraid they're going to lose their job. We have other factors of child and elder care, organizations being downsized, people having health issues. Some organizations are increasingly facing terrorism or environmental issues. We might be working with difficult coworkers, and there might be so much stress at work that people are not adapting well to the pace of change. When we look at the individual level about stress, if a person does not perceive that they're stressed, then they really are not stressed. If they perceive that they're stressed, then they're going to have all the traditional consequences associated with stress. Some of those causes of individual stress have to do with the perception that people have of the importance of the situation, how uncertain, like if maybe they're going to lose a job, or how long this lasts in terms of how long the merger is going to be and what's going to happen with it, or if they have a child that's sick or something like that, that could cause them quite a bit of stress. In terms of our organizational stress, we talked about there being a model. If we look at the beginning, we look at individual differences, and we, in the middle of the slide here, we have stress. And we have stressors, such as what might be happening within individuals. We might be having stressors that happen at the group level. We might be stressors that happen organizationally, like mergers, and there might even be non-work things associated with health and other stuff outside the organization. Those individual differences might lead to outcomes that are behavioral, individuals, groups, and organizations having behaviors that are indicative of stress. They might have thinking processes that are difficult for mental stability, or they might be physiologically sick, like starting to develop heart disease or diabetes or some of those other kinds of factors associated with stress. In terms of stressors for individuals, they might come from role conflict, where they might have one set of expectations conflicting with another set of expectations. Particularly in matrix organizations, we might see this. Qualitative overload, they might be unable to complete a job. There's many organizations have been downsized so much lately that some people are having, their jobs have been combined, and they have difficulty completing or feeling that their performance standards are being met. There might also be a quantitative overload, that they just have too many things to do and they can't get it done even at the quality level that they like. When we look at an underload-overload continuum, they have done research to say that you might have low performance when people actually don't have enough to do. They're bored, they're apathetic, they just stay home when there's not enough to do. Or they might be stressed when there's just too much work to do. They get irritable, they get really stressed, they don't sleep very well, and that results in low performance. So optimal performance is how we can help our employees keep their perceptions, have good energy, feel and motivated, like we talked about in the last 2 chapters around motivation. There's a factor that we look at with certain people that we identify as a hardiness trait. And some people can be exposed to very stressful events, and they don't seem to have as much stressful response to them, where other people who are not quite as hardy might have an extreme response to certain stress in their lives. So a lot of the people that have this hardiness trait tend to treat stress as a challenge rather than something to diminish them. So the greater the hardiness trait is of a person, the less likelihood that it will have some kind of impact on their health. In terms of group and organizational stressors, there's some things that we need to take a look at that cause stress in organizations. How much participation, how much group and intergroup relationships are going on, the politics of the organization, our culture, whether people are getting feedback on their performance, whether they have adequate career opportunities for advancement, and if they're finding that the organization is being downsized. Outside of work, we have some non-work stressors that play into a factor of whether an employee is feeling healthy and has a good sense of well-being, of maybe they are taking care of a child or they have an elderly parent, whether the economy, they might be facing a house in foreclosure, or a spouse that might have lost their job. They might not be able to, they might feel lack of mobility and their quality of life might be diminishing, or they might have commitments in terms of their volunteer work that that might affect them also doing their traditional job. In the research, they've shown that white-collar professionals tend to have fewer negative stress outcomes than blue-collar workers. A lot of that is really that blue-collar workers don't have as much control in some of their job environments as some of the white-collar workers. Some of the individual stress outcomes have psychological consequences and physiological consequences. So we might see that some of the outcomes of psychological stress has to do with anxiety. They might be frustrated. They might have apathy for their job. They might be showing signs of depression, and some of them might be actually a little bit more combative and aggressive to others in their job. Physiologically, we might start seeing things such as high blood pressure. We might see people having glucose issues. They might have stomach or irritable bowel syndrome or some increased heart rate. These start showing up and have serious long-term implications physiologically for people. One of the main issues we need to be worried about with our employees is burnout. It's a psychological process that results from people not having any kind of relief from their work stress. They get emotionally exhausted. They start depersonalizing their work, and they start feeling like their work isn't even worthwhile. So make sure you review some of this in terms of the consequences, because it's becoming a pretty serious issue with people being overworked. People who are emotionally exhausted are drained, they're fatigued, they're frustrated, and they start getting to a point where they don't want to work with others. And this also leads to sort of a depersonalization that, particularly if they're in the caregiving jobs, they start treating other people like objects. They don't care what happens. They start blaming others, and they get a little bit more calloused, and they don't seem to have as much warmth and care. And then they also start feeling that they have low personal accomplishment, where they're not dealing with their problems effectively. They're not making good decisions. They're not influencing people, and they don't really even care about their job anymore. Some of the organizational consequences of this kind of stress is it costs the organization money. People start making lousy decisions. They are not as creative. They start having different health problems. People leave the organization. People sabotage the organization. And this also, when we have health problems, our insurance premiums go up. Some moderators that we talked in terms of individual behavior of the big 5 that actually help moderate stress is that we have found that people that are more extroverted tend to deal better with stress. People who are more emotionally stable tend to deal well with stress. People who are able to get along better or agreeable. People who are conscientious, or people who like adventure and new experiences tend to adapt to stress a little bit better than others. Some other moderators have to do with personality. We have that if people feel that they're in control over the events, that they don't seem to get as stressed, as opposed to if it's external to them that, or if they see that it's external and they don't have anything to do with what is happening, they oftentimes don't feel as stressed. Also self-efficacy, that if a person is confident in one's ability, they seem to overcome stress factors. And they see, again, these people tend to see stressors as something to look at as an opportunity. One of the things that has been talked about is people who have type A and type B personalities. And type A personalities tend to be people who show strong signs of stress. And they're usually high performers, but they also in the long term tend to burn out. They struggle to get as much done as possible. They're aggressive, they're competitive, they're impatient. They speak out, finish sentences when other people are talking. They're very preoccupied with deadlines. And there always seems to be some kind of struggle going on with other people, other things and events because of this high need to accomplish things. What is helpful to moderate stress in our work environments is to provide social support. And we can do this through formal and informal groups. We can provide emotional support. We can try and provide information if they're struggling like with a family issue or something and help them reduce their stress. In terms of stress prevention and management, there's a lot of programs being developed in organizations to help people cope with stress. We're trying to redesign work to minimize stress. We're providing coaches to some of our executives that are overworked to help them with stress. We're trying to give people more flexible work hours if they're dealing with child care or elder care. We're trying to pay more attention to work-life balance. We're giving them more feedback. We're trying to give them situations where they can pay more attention to their health and fitness. We can develop stress management programs where we help people physiologically, emotionally, and behaviorally with their work and non-work stressors. One of the things that is helpful in looking at stress management, again, we talked about this in a previous chapter, is the person-environment fit. Does this person fit with this environment? Is this a good place for them to be? If so, then they're probably not going to have as much stress. So work provides that formal and informal reward that might meet a person's needs, and if their needs are met, then they probably won't feel as much stress. Their knowledge, skills, and abilities matched to those needs also reduce the potential for stress. And really stress, I don't think stress is ever going to really be eliminated, but it can be reduced. But if we improve the fit between the employee, their job, and the organizational environment, we're going to have a much more high-performing organization. Some of this plays out in how we socialize our employees, how individuals learn the behavior and what's effective in an organization. If they fit in with that, they feel less stress. If it's in conflict with who they are and what they do and so forth, they're going to feel very stressed. In many organizations, we see employee assistance programs that if we start having problems with alcohol abuse, help them with counseling for stress-related problems. We usually have a more traditional medical approach where there might be a diagnosis, treatment, screening, and prevention. A lot of this is outsourced in organizations, particularly for privacy issues for employees. Some companies start wellness programs. They focus on overall physical and mental health. They might start, fitness programs, smoking cessation, diet, exercise, all of that kind of stuff is we see happening in organizations today. We want to make wellness an integral part of our organization to help reduce stress, and this will help us achieve our overall mission and strategy if we have a healthy workforce. So we might produce a written policy statement about health. We might get executives involved in action plans around wellness, and we'll definitely commit needed organizational resources to improve the wellness environment. We want to sustain our wellness environment by looking at best practices in organizations and keeping our employees so that they have a good balanced work life. Lots of times people will seek other kinds of approaches individually. Biofeedback has been very popular, meditating, relaxation training, mindfulness training, all of that is shown to help individuals reduce their stress, and many organizations have implemented these kinds of approaches inside their company.